Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra,
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people.
associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked.
and sometimes what didn't,
You will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts.
And inspire you to do even greater things.
In this conversation, I'm speaking to Naresh Jain, who needs no introduction to the Indian Agile community, having started the Agile software community in 2004 and going on to engage them with various ways, particularly the Agile India conference that happens every year. He talks about his initial career roles and also how the paper on Test Infected by Kent Beck influenced him, and he saw the value behind extreme programming. We also talk about building communities using conferences and what goes into putting together a good conference. Then he shares how he landed up as a coach or a mentor and some of the different roles, such as coach, mentor, trainer, and a captain that one needs to be when engaging with teams and helping them improve. We also talk about the code room and the boardroom and how he is able to relate to both of them. And finally, he shares his ideas that he is experimenting this year in the Agile India conference. And of course, some tips for those aspiring coaches. Listen on. Welcome to the Software People Stories, Naresh. I know that you are pretty well known and you do have a big fan base, but still, for the listeners, it will be good to hear your origin story as well as what has been your, let's say, professional trajectory in your own words, and then we will take it from there.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Shiv. I'd like to believe that I am a practitioner, a hands-on developer, and someone who is still exploring and trying to figure out and learn every day. I happened to start my career building neural networks for the Indian Space Research Organization. Of course, 20 years back, neural networks were pretty shitty, so we couldn't do much. But that kind of helped me get into more of a professional career at Deutsche Bank, where they were building things for equity research using neural networks, and they wanted someone to test the model. And that's how I kind of got into a corporate life, if you will. It always amazed me in terms of why can't we figure out that what we have built actually works before it goes out to someone in testing or whatever. And that kind of led me to my journey onto figuring out this paper from Kent Beck, Test Infected. And that kind of, it made me actually fall off the chair laughing when I read about that paper, because I was thinking that Kent is actually pulling a fast one, right? Like nobody around me back then loved testing or writing tests, right? Especially the developers. And so this paper was talking about how developers should learn, how developers love writing tests. And so it kind of was a bit of thing. But this actually to me was a cornerstone in terms of actually seeing the real value behind extreme programming, if you will. And that led me to ThoughtWorks, and then from there onwards to many interesting companies. And I think in my career so far, I've been extremely fortunate to be in a lot of interesting companies where I've learned tremendously, and I hope I've added some value in the process. So that is something that I would say on the professional side. That's how I've kind of grown. Along the way, somewhere, I think, me, Owen Rogers, and Manoj put together the first Agile India conference. And that has become also a part of my identity, if you will, nowadays. Since 2004, been running the Agile India conferences and the community. And I feel that's another part of me, which then got me into organizing conferences itself. So Agile India was one thing, but then we kind of grew beyond Agile India. I know Simon reached out to me. He said that India has a very large Selenium user base, and we would like to run a conference in India. And I know that you are someone who is highly recommended to put together a community based conference. And so I kind of happened to run Selenium. From there came Appium, Open Data Science Conference, Functional Programming, jQuery, Eclipse, like a lot of conferences from there. And it's been, again, a fascinating journey for me organizing conferences itself. Yeah. So those are, I think, the two parts about me, if you will, in a short sense.
Yeah, that's nice. A few questions triggered by that.
Sure.
Before I come to the other side of Naresh from being a rocket scientist, since you started there, of sorts. Yeah. To becoming a coach or a trainer or helping organizations. We'll come to that probably a little later. But first is in terms of even organizing these conferences, I think conferences have been successful because of the communities. So what has been your experience and how did you get to become, let's say, a catalyst for creating these communities or nurturing these communities?
That's a great question, Shiv. I remember when me, Owen, and Manoj were trying to put together that supposedly the first extreme programming conference, XP Day. And someone made a comment that, who is this conference for, right? There isn't a community. Like, who are you putting the conference together? And me being the stupid young chap then, I made the comment that if there isn't a community, the conference will build the community. That's how I think we started with the Agile India conference. And slowly, there's so many people I never knew in India who were doing extreme programming back then. For example, Subex Systems, there used to be a company called Subex Systems. KD, who was the CTO, he came forward saying, hey, we have tremendously benefited from extreme programming. We would love to support this conference. And he did a generous donation of 1 lakh rupees back then to the conference. And it was actually a donation. He said, we don't need any recognition. We've just benefited so much from this conference. And this is where I felt like, there is actually a community. We may not be seeing it, but when we try to put a conference together, you will see this community, like almost, people emerging from the forest come out, and you see this community forming together. And then you see a lot of people at the fence, right, who are not sure, who are new or still kind of thinking about it. And then you also slowly expand and bring them in, right? And that's what I think, these conferences have meant to me is to bring in people into the community, pull them into the community and build the community stronger. So hopefully that kind of answers your question. What's kind of the interest for me in the community?
Yeah, the first part. But also having been part of the program committee a few times and also looking at the kind of submissions that have been coming in, I've always had this curiosity question. So many people who want to share their experience find this as a good platform to share. But in spite of the numbers that has been growing, we've been able to maintain both a certain quality as well as a diversity of topics and experiences that come in. So as a person who is also a professional who has probably certain preferences, certain favorite topics and all that, now how do you balance to make sure that the conferences that you put together are all balanced and bring out something for the participants?
Absolutely. I think that's again a great question in terms of putting a program together is people. It's way harder than people think about it for a few reasons, right? One is a lot of times we don't know a lot of stuff, right? No matter how good you are, how well read you are, there are always things that you don't know. When proposals start coming in, you have to do your amount of research on that topic. So one could look at it as a great way to expand and learn. But it's also challenging because there's always a time crunch, right? So how do you balance that? So the first part of putting a good program together is accepting that there's so much you don't know, and then actually going and reading about it so you can do a good evaluation of the proposal that has come in. The second aspect, like you said, is we all have our backgrounds, our experiences, our biases. And so, one has to really keep that aside and evaluate the proposals for the real value of it. Right. And then you also have to, I always keep saying, right, we want to put a conference together which we are interested in attending. We are not putting a conference together for somebody else. We are putting to a conference together because we don't feel that there is this quality of conference that I would like to go and attend that will help me learn and grow. And so at some stage, I think all of us, Shiv, you've been a very integral part of this. We all came together with the belief that let's put together a conference that we believe that we want to attend, that we would enjoy attending. You have to keep your favorite topics, everything aside, because you want to learn as well. And you want to, explore new topics and stuff like that. And a lot of times about the diversity aspect, right? There is a very important aspect about diversity is experience of presenting at conferences. We get very seasoned speakers. We are fortunate to have people who are very experienced, who come and speak at the conference, or willing to come and speak. But we also get a lot of aspiring first-time speakers. And so how do you nurture them? How do you mentor them? How do you give them the opportunity that gives them the confidence to go on and do more, right? And I believe that is another important dilemma often is, where do you draw the line, and how do you strike a balance? Because, you want to give opportunity to first time speakers, but you also want to, make sure that the conference program is attractive with big names and so forth to draw people's attention. That's the third aspect of the balance that becomes harder. And of course, people from different countries and different backgrounds, and also diversity of topics is very important. And so I think someone once said that Agile India for them is very interesting because we are always on the lookout for topics at the edge, the mainstream topics, but the topics at the edge. And I think that's also hard, right? Because not many people at the edge think what they're doing is interesting enough to be shared. Helping them believe and get them to the program is harder. So, and Shiv, you probably know this, but we try and strike a balance in terms of invited speakers versus through the open submission. And that's also been a topic of contention, right? So a lot of people feel that we should go full all open submission only. There are people either very well-known folks who are not going to come through a submission system, or there are people who are not known at all but are doing very interesting things, and they are not going to come usually through a submission system as well. So we also have to go and look out for those folks and then try to weave them into the program. So anyway, those are a few aspects in terms of the diversity and maintaining, and then working very hard towards stopping your own bias towards the topics that you have a natural inclination. But I still think, honestly, all said and done, the program will still be a little biased, in my opinion.
That's the flavor or the character of the conference.
So that's the character is how we can say and get away. But that is the reality, yes.
I have a couple more questions on Agile India. We'll come to that. But before that, I am also curious. You also practice one of the statements in the value saying, by doing it and helping others do it.
Yeah.
So you've also been a coach and you've been helping a lot of teams and organizations. So what was the trigger, or what was the inflection point that from an individual contributor, I can make a greater impact as someone who helps others?
I think back when I was at ThoughtWorks, and as we were running these conferences, one of the things that occurred to me is that, there are a lot of people out there who want to, who aspire to do things better, but they don't have someone to guide them or mentor them. And as someone trying to run those Agile India conferences, it kind of put you in a opportunity where you could potentially people could see you as someone who knows about this topic and someone who could influence it. And so I started getting a lot of requests for weekend visiting their office and having a look at what they're doing and giving some suggestions or things like that. So it started purely as something we could do over the weekend to kind of do this. And then I used to work for ThoughtWorks back then, and ThoughtWorks obviously was in the business of consulting. Through ThoughtWorks, I remember ended up going to to US for consulting for a company, and that's where again, like, I started creating this Agile Philly user group, and it kind of started getting a little bit more into I wouldn't say coaching, but a little bit more mentoring, if you will, role with teams. And it was an interesting experience, right? Like this ability that what knowledge you have, you can package it in a way that people can find it meaningful and useful. That realization is a bit addictive as well. Like it kind of helps you do more and more of it. So that's kind of how I landed a little bit into mentoring organizations, if you will. Yeah, I was at this conference that JB Reinsberg had put together, and that's where I met Deborah Hartman, and we were talking about the difference between coaching and mentoring and other forms of consulting or training and things like that. And that's kind of what triggered this thought process for us to put together the first Agile Coach Camp in Michigan. So Deb and I put together, something called as the Agile Coach Camp. That is the point where, when talking to a lot of other folks, we started trying to draw the differences between what a coach does versus what a mentor does versus what a trainer does. And sometimes when you are in consulting, you need to wear these different hats. I also happen to say that there is another role called the captain's role, right, which is very different from a coach's role. And so I've often struggled between the coach's role and the captain's role, because sometimes you get too vested in the company and what you're trying to do, and you end up playing the captain's role a little bit, where you try to take charge of responsibility for the outcomes, and you get too attached with the problems, which, while as a coach, I always find that you're a little detached from the outcomes, and you really want to help people improve their skills and do the best they can, and enabling them is more important. So it's like, taking the sports analogy, as a coach, you want good sportsmanship. You want a good game. Whether you win or lose is not so critical, but as a captain, winning or losing becomes very critical. And so I've always been, at least since 2012, I would say, I've been struggling between these two roles to a large extent. And my journey of getting into mentoring, and then a little bit of coaching, and then also playing the captain, and then still struggling between the two.
At the beginning of our conversation, you introduced yourself as a developer. Now, from an individual contributor or somebody who goes there and does that, and coming up to probably shades of captaincy, how do you say balance, or how do you relate to the needs of the code room as well as the boardroom?
I think that's always a struggle, right? I'm a creator at heart. I'm a developer at heart. And I mean, I like development because the sheer joy of doing something, of constructivism, of building something, and you can see it in action. I still like write code every day, and sometimes I even tell people that if I don't write code, I can't fall asleep because it's therapeutic for me. When it is in the code room, it is a lot of things are under your control. But when it's in the boardroom, there are many factors that are outside your control, and often the job is to try and project a path forward, even without knowing that what you don't know and what are all the variables out there. For me, the kind of playing leadership role in some of the companies that I've had, and having to interact with board or with investors, has always been a challenging journey because of all the unknowns and things like that. But it's also a very fascinating thing, because you really see how people are trying to drive the vision that they have. You can, bring the pragmatism of someone on the ground into that boardroom and help people understand that, hey, this is, practical or not. But one of the things that I really love about being in the boardrooms is that they are looking at real transformations, right? Like in the boardrooms, they are not looking at what is the next logical small improvement that we can make. Generally, when I put myself in the developer's shoes, I'm thinking very small incremental pieces, right? Like it's one step at a time. But in the boardroom, you're in the opposite spectrum of that. You're looking at essentially, what is the next quantum leap as a company and as a industry you could make. And so sometimes when you go from one extreme to another extreme, it kind of gives you a very interesting perspective to contribute, saying how you can completely disrupt something or do something in a very different way than before. So that's I would say the spectrum between developing something on your own where everything is under your control, to trying to drive a transformation in the boardroom where there are a lot of unknowns and a lot of things outside your control.
Yeah. So when you talk about transformation and disruption, and also at the boardroom level, there are a lot of fuzzy issues. Maybe on one side, the culture or anything that goes along with that, or on the other side, the dreaded ROI of these initiatives. So how do you usually explain to them or let them understand that whether some things take time, or what could be ways in which they can get some reassurance?
I often find that it is logic does not really hold very good in the boardrooms. You can have all your logical arguments laid out, but they don't work that well. Not because the folks there are not logical, but those folks over there are looking at unrealistic goals. They are looking at a transformation. They're looking at the next quantum leap. And logic sometimes doesn't cut it. So what has been generally my strategy that has helped me is to try and make a bold statement that resonates with them, that gets their attention. So I remember in one of those meetings, I had mentioned that code is a liability. The less you have is better, right? So all these measurements that we are putting together is all essentially measuring output. And so, that may be misleading, right? And that resonated with them, right? And so you get a nexus with them that, yes, this guy understands what we're talking about. And so that is where people move from more of a output centric view of what the initiatives we are trying to drive to more of an outcome based view. And that's where then again we can put our heads together and come up with a set of outcome metrics and things like that, which can help the company move forward. But it's not just what you can measure. It's also things that, which again, I don't really like using the word mindset or culture, but there is that aspect, is that what's the vibe in the office, right? When you enter the office, what does it feel like? And so there are softer aspects, or there are experiences that are hard to kind of, put on a number to it. But that's also helping the board see that and kind of experience that is important. But I find often these guys have a very high EQ. And so if you can try and strike a chord with them on the EQ level, I think it generally helps. So that's kind of a little bit of what I've done. But honestly, there isn't a silver bullet. There isn't a technique that always works. And different companies have different pain points. I think one thing, at least good thing that I've learned from coaching is listen, right? Listen and help them articulate the problem clearly. So once you can help the board articulate their concern clearly, that itself to me is half of the problem solved. Once you've got there, then it's a question of, trying to make one or two meaningful statements that help them resonate that, okay, this is kind of the direction, or this is what is important. And of course, the gray hairs helps, because now they see as someone who has enough credibility, so they'll give you a bit of faith or trust to try out something and then kind of demonstrate, what I would say.
Yeah, on the lighter side, I think too much of gray hair like what I have is a liability. Because recently I was talking to someone, and they said, yeah, we understand what you're saying, everything is fine, but if you don't mind, can we ask you a question? said, yeah, please. How do you keep in touch with what is happening now? Probably the assumption was that probably something that I knew years ago is what I'm going to be coming and then talking about and doing that. So it is an interesting question. Then gray hair was not a great asset.
But if you see my generally introductions, I always say struggling to stay up to date with technology evolution, right? It's not a question about gray hair or whatever, but I think the honest answer is all of us are struggling to stay up to date. There is just so much happening around us, and the rate of change is just mind-boggling, which means that the rate at which we need to unlearn has to go up significantly given the amount of things that are changing. I mean, I still run into engineering heads and stuff like that who are stuck in, this premature performance optimizations or things like that. And you're like, hey, guys, you're talking as if, we are in the 90s. This is not how, the virtual machines work anymore, right? There's a whole lot of optimizations that they do that, what you're doing is kind of an anti-pattern. But it's just like, I've been fortunate to be in that, but I still don't know what I don't know. And there might be like a whole lot of anti-patterns that I might also be suggesting. In fact, this is an interesting point where I should talk about one experiment I ran. And this is also, like we've been running conferences. And so putting these conferences together, is a lot of just coordination work. And so back in 2011, 2012, I started just hacking like a little tool for myself to just streamline some of the coordination work of the conferences. And so that is like a platform that is evolved called ConfEngine, right? But when I started working on ConfEngine, I took a conscious call because I started feeling that I am getting too dogmatic about things. Right. So I took a conscious call that I will basically not do anything that I consider myself as a best practice or as something that I would recommend other people, because I felt like I was probably getting too dogmatic or too out of touch with what is going on out there. So I picked the worst possible programming language anyone would recommend, PHP, right? And everyone was like laughing at it, like like why would you write something in PHP? And I was trying to explain to them that, hey, this is really an experiment for me to really throw away whatever I think is best and start as if I'm a kid out of a college and see what happens. And you'd be surprised. It's been 9 years now, maybe close to 10 years. I do not regret even a single time, building that in PHP. In fact, it's become one of my favorite languages, and I've been able to convince a whole lot of people who first laugh at it to actually now see the power of the simplicity that it brings together, the share nothing architecture of PHP. Similarly, like this, there were a lot of other decisions. So up till very recently, we were always running ConfEngine on a shared hosting, right? We used to pay like $10 a month for shared hosting. And I used to run basically all my sites on that same shared hosting server. And people would be amazed, like how could you run something like like ConfEngine on a shared hosting server? It's not possible, right? Like, but actually we kind of tend to throw away a lot of this stuff, in the name of whatever, like next gen engineering excellence kind of things.
Right.
And we throw away the simplicity. In fact, till we didn't have any tests, we didn't write any tests in ConfEngine. And again, that is, I've spoken about this before, is that when you practice something, test-driven development, for 10 years, and then you stop doing it out of choice, not as a accident, but out of choice, then you actually see the trade-offs that you were making back then. One simple example is, I know when I write tests, I can get away with some amount of complexity. But when I don't have tests, then I can't really get away with any complexity, because that is immediately going to bite me back. So that is one thing that has been very profound for me, is the amount of simplicity now I can achieve in code because I don't have the safety net of tests. And sometimes, it takes 10 years for you to realize that. But anyway, that just went into the sidetrack a little bit to just explain about how sometimes we all have to step back and reevaluate what we think are considered as the state of the art things and go back to the basics to just realize that that is really not the case. That's been my experience basically.
Yeah, that's very interesting. On one hand, they say that there is so much to learn and things that we need to keep pace with, or whether we really need to keep pace with is the second part. Maybe things that work for us. But knowing all this, I think it's a good segue to come back to the Agile India conference, where this is personally something that I have experienced. And one of the reasons I'm also happy about contributing towards it is it's like a pressure cooker learning. In those few days, you get such a diversity of topics and people who've been there, done that. It is not only concepts that are discussed. So would you like to share some sneak peek or preview into what's in store this year? It's hardly another month, right?
Yeah, I mean, Agile India has always been that, like you said, the pressure cooker learning, right? Like, is amazing. And it's also something where you look at your own learning and you try to figure out what's missing in this program and how you can, strike that balance. So for me, this year is going to be very special because I have been trying to get Ward Cunningham to come and speak at this conference since we started, right? 2004 onwards, every year pretty much I would try to send an email to him saying, Ward, if you're available, can you please come to the conference? Because for me, Ward Cunningham holds a very special place. He's probably one of the guys who has done so much to contribute to this community. I think that we probably sometimes overlook. He's the inventor of Wiki. He's the one who started design patterns. He was Agile Manifesto signatory, core creator of extreme programming, and on, right? But he's one of the things he's not that well known for is he started something called FIT, which is, this is a framework for FIT isn't for testing, is what it stands for. And this was a way before all your BDD really kicked in, right? This was kind of the precursor for BDD. And I remember having this great opportunity once to pair with him on FIT. And what I realized is Ward is also one of the guys who really made object-oriented popular, right? But he had violated a lot of OO principles in that FIT framework. And it kind of gave me a glimpse into how a genius thinks, right? So you make the rules first, and then you break the rules to really go beyond it, right? And FIT was one such experience for me, and I've seen Ward do that so many times. So it's very fascinating. So that's one thing I would say that I'm really looking forward to this conference is finally having the opportunity to host Ward at the conference. Wow. We have a whole bunch of other fascinating speakers that are coming to the conference. The key thing I would tell, at least for me, is when I put these conferences together, is the opportunity to actually spend some time with these speakers, which is very hard otherwise. You read their books, you see them online, all that is great, right? But when you actually sit down and get to know them as a person, and you're able to share some of your learnings with them and see their reaction to it, it's a very different form of learning, I would say. And so that is something that I generally look forward to these conferences, and I encourage everyone to take this opportunity, because one thing that we truly believe is that reading a book about some topic is one thing, and getting to actually pick a person's brain on a specific problem that you're solving is a very different thing. And so these conferences give you that opportunity to be able to, just walk up to these speakers. Of course, in the virtual world, you can now do a video call with these speakers and get the opportunity to pick their brains on the specific problem that you're facing. And that's, to me, like free consulting that you're getting. But more importantly, just this form of interaction is what I look forward to at the conference. Yeah, I mean, of course, there are a lot of other speakers, and I can spend the rest of the evening talking about them. But this is, of course, isn't about Agile India. So I'll just mention that one name and pause.
Yeah. Anyway, we will include the details of the conference in the show notes. But just to quickly tell our listeners, what are the dates for the conference this year?
Yeah, so the conference is happening November 18th, 19th, and 20th. It's a 3-day conference. We have, for the listeners who are familiar with Agile India, we generally used to use a format of one theme per day. And so we used to do a 4-day conference with pre and post conference workshops. This year, we decided to do something different. Every year we do something different, and that's the fun part of running a conference for me. Is every year there's a new experiment. This year the experiment is, what if we break away from these theme-wise days and actually mix up the themes? So what you will see is actually across the 3 days we have intentionally mixed up all the themes, because I strongly believe that if you're a program manager or if you're a product manager, then all you need to know about is product management or program management is not the right view, in my opinion. So by mixing everything up and basically creating what someone might call a hodgepodge of a schedule, I believe might actually be a great exposure to people to learn about all the different aspects about what it takes to put, beautiful modern products out there. So yeah, that's another interesting experiment we are running this year. We will see how it goes. I already got a lot of emails from people saying, hey, why are we not doing the day-wise themes and why we're not selling tickets per day? And I'm like, hey, please trust us and be part of this experiment. We will see how it goes. We need to try something different every year.
But we do hear a lot about becoming full stack, whatever, right? So this probably helps in discovering adjacencies and then becoming fuller stack than whatever one is today.
Full stack is a very interesting concept, right? Generally, people talk about full stack in the context of a developer, which basically means you should be able to work on the full technology stack, which means front end, back end, databases, etc. But there's another dimension of full stack, right? Is basically that understanding the requirements, breaking down the requirements, then coming up with a solution, architecting it in some way, actually doing the development, along the way probably also testing it, and then also thinking about capacity planning, how you're going to deploy this, how you're going to manage this in operations, and what kind of observability, etc. So that's another dimension on full stack, in my opinion, right? I think as we are kind of evolving, like a lot of solopreneurs that I see, who are people who've built an entire business, technology business, they generally end up being full stack on both these dimensions. And I think personally, that's the journey I am also taking. And I feel like that makes you contribute far more to the problem space than kind of being full stack in just one dimension. I think that's, as you rightly said, the conference is trying to give people exposure to all these elements of full stack, which is, one is obviously the front end, back end, that kind of a full stack. The other is also the life cycle full stack, right? And so hopefully, people will get a feel for it.
As we come towards the end of this conversation, there's one question that I normally ask my guests, which is career advice. In your case, it is more about people wanting to become a coach. I heard multiple reasons. Sometimes they say, I'm tired of doing the same thing, let me do something else. Or today, the coach seems to be an aspirational role or a safe role, particularly in larger organizations that are taking up these transformation initiatives, saying that I don't want to become redundant. I haven't heard a great full reason to become a coach with many existing people who say, can I become a coach? So what would be your thoughts on that?
And I'm sorry, I'll go a little controversial here, but I think this fascination for becoming a coach, right, is a bit of a misplaced fascination, in my opinion. I didn't grow up thinking, hey, I will be a coach, right? It is something that you become over a period of time. People call you a coach. You don't become a coach, if you will. I see a lot of people out there going through whatever, these certifications, these trainings, and then basically working their way through, and organizations also giving them the hope that, yes, you do these, you follow this path and you will become, a coach. Nobody becomes a great teacher by going through a set curriculum and giving a bunch of examination to become like a teacher, right? Like, you have to earn the respect to be a teacher. I don't think you should set out saying, I want to be a coach. I think you should set out saying, hey, I want to make a real difference in whatever my area of expertise is. And as you start doing more and more of that, people will come to you seeking for help, saying, hey, can you help me with this? Right. And someday you will realize that you are being a mentor or a coach to people. And that's how I look at being a coach, rather than you declaring yourself, I am a coach, and trying to often, with your limited experience in the overall space, trying to guide people or misguide people. I unfortunately see a lot of that happening, and every time I feel someone throwing their weight around saying I'm a certified X and I am this and that, I feel sorry for them, because this is not going to help you in the long run, right? And do what you're doing, go deep in what you're doing, and earn that a badge to be a coach. Don't self-declare and start telling people what they should do, because that's not what great teachers do.
Thanks. But I have a bonus question. Just, what is the Naresh formula or the Naresh model for time management?
That Naresh is very bad at. In fact, 2 weeks back, out of action, I was not well for about a week. And one of my really good friends said, hey, this is a wake-up call for you. You should realize that your body is not designed to work so much. I actually do believe that I'm not a great person to give advice on that. One thing I've learned from my dad is there is no shortcut but hard work, right? I end up doing a lot of hard work and not probably smart work. So I am probably the wrong person to be giving anybody advice on time management. I think there are people who I envy who get so much done, but also have the right balance, between the work and what they like to do and family and etc. And I'm probably not the best person when it comes to this.
Very candid. So on that note, Naresh, let me thank you for the time taken and all your stories and the experience that you've shared.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks, Shiv. It was great, and I appreciate all the interesting questions you've asked me.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
please subscribe on your favorite podcast client
and spread the word in your network.
If you'd like to share your story,
contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.